Okay, hey guys, I hope you've been doing well. This is the second video of the psych syllabus for the AS syllabus, and this time we'll be talking about Dement Kleitman's research, which happened in 1957. It was mostly about sleeping, dreaming, REM, and non-REM. We'll talk about all of these terms later in this video. This study had three aims, which I'll divide this video according to the aim, the procedure, and the results, and I think that'll be easier for you to understand. Okay, let's start. So there's a little meme about sleeping and dreaming. So these are the questions that we'll try to answer today. What are the different stages of dreams? What is an EEG? This chapter covers all about that. Okay, so let's talk about the background first. So sleeps and dreams can be difficult to study because participants may not be responsive, and the only descriptions when they can give are when they're awake, right? So subjective, and they also lacked physiological measures before this two people, which was Ezrensky and Kleitman in 1955. They were the first to use physiological measures of sleep to explore the relationship between sleep and dreaming. So, like Dement and Kleitman, they also used an EEG, electroencephalogram, to record brain activity and eye movements, and they also showed that there were several stages of sleep during the night, alternating between REM and non-REM sleep. Okay, and they also found out that participants who were woken from REM sleep were more likely to report a vivid visual dream than when woken in other stages. Okay, so so you don't need to know this in detail, but these are just the different stages of sleep. And this is a sleep spindle. All right, so basically there's different types of waves, which is alpha, theta, and delta. Just all you need to know really is the REM. In REM sleep, basically your eyes move rapidly under your eyelids, and it mimics like the pattern of an awake mind, which you can see between the two graphs, the REM sleep and the awake graph, and it's usually correlated with dreams. And non-REM, which is usually stages of 1 to 4 sleep, stage 1 to 4 of sleep, and the eyes are still, and this is known as quiet sleep, and there's not much dreams. So what are the features of the REM stage, right? So it has a small amplitude, fast patterns, and low voltage, and non-REM is opposite, high amplitude, high voltage, and slow moving patterns. And just take note that the amplitude refers to the height of waves on the EEG. And so we've been talking about the EEG a lot. So what exactly is it? So EEG is basically a machine which is used to detect and record electrical activity in nerve and muscle cells when many of them are active at the same time. It uses macro electrodes, which are large electrodes stuck to the skin and scalp, and then it produces a chart called an encephalogram, which shows brain waves which vary in terms of frequency and amplitude over time, and also can record eye movement, which was useful in the third aim of the study. So we'll come back to that later. Okay, so let's talk about the features of the study. So the study was a repeated measures design because they took part in all three different aims, the same 9 participants, and there was 9 participants, right? So 7 males and 2 females. 5 of them were studied in depth, and 4 of them were used to confirm data. So the sample was quite small, and I would say that the sample was gender biased since there were more males than females. It was a natural experiment because the IV was naturally occurring for all three of experiments, and it was a laboratory experiment because it was equipped with EEG scanners, and they were studied in a laboratory. They came to the laboratory just before their normal bedtime as well. Right, so they were basically instructed to come to the lab just before their normal bedtime. They were instructed to eat normally, but avoid caffeine-containing drinks and alcohol. So it was a good control, but it also affected ecological validity. We'll talk about that in the evaluation as well. So the general procedure was that they slept in a dark and quiet room, and electrodes were attached near the eyes and scalp, and the wires were called together to form a single cord so that they could sleep comfortably, and it was to prevent them from getting entangled in all the wires. They were woken up at various times using a loud doorbell, so it helped to limit the communication between the experimenter and the participant, because they eliminated that aspect completely and used the doorbell. So, and it was for the three different aims. So it was either for the first, second, or third. Um, and then they used a tape recorder to record the contents of the dream. So um, from these two, point 4 and 5, you can see that the communication between the participant and the experimenter was limited, and they tried to avoid it. So I'll come back to that as well. So the first aim, so experiment 1. So aim was to investigate if dream recall differed in REM and non-REM sleep. The IV was whether participants were woken in REM or non-REM sleep. Dependent variable was whether participants were having a dream, and the self-reports containing details of the dream when they describe what they were seeing or experiencing within that dream. So the procedure was just the general procedure which I described previously, and then also take note that the experimenters only asked questions after participant finished recording their dream report. So there was also minimal communication between participant and experimenters. So it can help to reduce demand characteristics. So what are the results? So out of 152, 152 out of 191 awakenings in REM sleep were associated with dream recall, while 11 out of 160 were associated with dream recall in non-REM sleep. And then within 8 minutes of REM periods ending, 5 out of 17 dreams were recalled. And after 8 minutes of REM sleep ending, 6 out of 132 were associated with dreams which were recalled. Okay. So the second part of the experiment was to investigate if there was a correlation between subjective estimate of dream duration and length of REM period. So the IV for this was length of REM period participants were woken from, whether it was 5 or 15 minutes. Dependent variable was their subjective estimate of dream duration and the participant's self-report of dream. So estimate of dream duration was once they were woken up, they were asked whether do you think there was a 5 minutes or 15 minutes? So the procedure, so it followed the general procedure, and they were made to guess the length of dream duration and also the length of dream narrative that they had spoken, and to describe their dream content was analyzed by counting number of words. So results. So for the 5 minutes of REM, they had 88% accuracy on guessing correct duration. For 15 minutes of REM, they had a 78% accuracy, so it had low accuracy. And then there was a participant, his initials were DN. He made the most mistakes because he could not recall the end of the dream, so he misjudged the entire dream duration. And then for the dream reports, so basically the correlation coefficient ranged from 0.4 to 0.71 for the 5 participants. So it helped to allow the researchers to understand that the length of dream narrative was significantly correlated to the length of REM period, and also helped to confirm that dreams were in fact happening in real time. So the third part, so it was to investigate if eye movements during dreams were related to the were related to visual experience of dream content, or whether they were just due to activation of central nervous system. So the IV for this was with the eye movement, which was eye movement pattern which was observed. So vertical, horizontal, mixture of vertical and horizontal, and no eye movement patterns. DV was the dream report, and procedure was they woken up after more than 1 minute of the single eye movement pattern being observed. Right, so the results. So vertical had 3 dreams. In total, there was 35. So out of that, vertical had 3. One was looking out to shoot a basketball towards the hoop, and then looking down to pick up the ball from the floor, standing at the bottom of a cliff and looking up and down to see climbers at different heights while using a horse, and then climbing a series of ladders while looking up and down. Horizontal had only 1, and there was 2 people throwing tomatoes at each other. Little to none was generally involved with looking at something at a distance, and 2 of these instances were associated with large eye movement just before awakening. Sorry, there's a spelling mistake over here. So in both of them, they were driving a car. So in one of them, they reached an intersection, and then the person was startled by the sudden appearance of a speeding car, just as the bell rang to wake him up. And then the other one was he was driving and he saw a man on the left, and he acknowledged him while driving past. Mixed, there was 21 instances, and this was generally associated with looking at something close by, an object or a person. Example, fighting with someone. So I'd recommend you remember one example from each, because they can ask you to describe what exactly was seen from one of the participants, or is taken out, because it's a type of qualitative data. So the conclusion, so dreams probably occur during REM and occur regularly throughout the night. And dreams which were reported during non-REM are those experienced in a previous REM episode. Length of REM periods and estimation by participants indicate that dreams are not instantaneous events but are experienced in real time. And eye movements during REM sleep is not due to activation of central nervous system and correspond to what dreamer is looking at in the dream. So let's talk about the evaluation. So strengths. So these are the points: laboratory experiment, internal validity, and EEG. So I've added some short questions for you to think about. I'll recommend you to pause here and try to think about why these are strengths. Okay, so why was laboratory experiment a strength? So it allowed for researchers to be more confident in establishing a causal relationship due to high internal validity. So controls. So what are the controls used in this study? So basically, the study was conducted at the participant's normal bedtime. There was an alcohol and caffeine restriction, use of a dark, quiet room, and wires were coiled. So it makes the artificial environment more comfortable for participants. So it ensured that these extraneous variables did not affect the participants' sleeping and dreaming patterns. So and also allowed for a standardized procedure, so you could add that it's more reliable. So also, how is high internal validity achieved? So the first one does also achieve high internal validity. So I like to separate these 2 points. So achieved in two ways. One was by reducing demand characteristics by reducing influence of experimenters' presence and expectations of the dream reports. So as I've been saying from the start about minimal communication. So I kept repeating minimal communication. So how does this affect how is this strength? So it reduces demand characteristics by reducing influence of their presence and expectations. So they use the bell to wake up participants. They use a recording device, so there was no interference by the experimenter. Questions were only asked after the participant finished reporting. They were also not told whether they were woken from REM or non-REM, or the eye movement pattern once they were woken up. And what about omission of partial reports? So the definition of dream that they had given was clearly operationalized as recollection of content rather than a subjective feeling that participant was just dreaming. So it helps to eliminate these vague, fragmented reports and increases validity, because only data which is relevant to the study is collected, and only reports which were clear indications of dreaming were taken. Again, like, why was EEG a strength? Okay, so this is similar to the point which I said about fMRI in Canley et al.'s research. So complex machinery, so basically allows them to investigate dreaming objectively. Why is it objectively? Because without the EEG, experimenters would have to physically examine the participants to know their eye movements, and this would have low internal validity because it's uncertain, because it creates uncertainty by unable to distinguish between vertical and horizontal or mixture, for example. And without EEG, there's no actual other way to investigate REM and non-REM, and they would have to wake participants up randomly throughout the night. So that's why it's objective. So let's talk about the weaknesses. So self-reports, validity of data collection method. So I'll recommend you to stop here and try to think about why these are weaknesses before you listen to my explanation. Okay, let's continue. So the data was collected by self-reports. So it's not possible to be completely sure if participant was being truthful or whether they were fabricating a story or responding to demand characteristics. So it does reduce the validity of the data. So because it's not representative of the actual dreams. So try to recall why the sample was issue. Okay, wait. Before you go to the sample, also self-reports collect rich qualitative data, which is also influenced by researcher bias due to subjective interpretation. So inference would differ from one person to another, which would reduce validity of interpreted data. Okay, so think about why sample is a weakness. Try to recall what the sample was. Five participants were studied in depth. 4 ways for data confirmation. So the sample size is undesirable and it's not representative of target population, so it limits generalizability. 7 male, so it's androcentric sample and it's gender biased. What about participant variables? Okay, so there were participant variables affect this study quite a bit. So for example, difference in narrative length, which was analyzed in experiment 2, it depends on how expressive a participant is. Depends on how whether they are introvert or whether they were extrovert. It also has a highly verbal task and relied on memory for dream reports. So participants should have been measured on their verbal fluency and memory ability prior to recruitment. So these factors affect the self-reports, which contain valid rich data, but it could have been discarded by mistake. For example, DN, he kept making a mistake in estimating dream duration because he was unable to remember the last few details in his dream. It could be possible due to his poor memory. So this is the influence of participant variables, so it would decrease internal validity. What about ecological validity? Why was it low? So there's no doubt that they slept in an unusual, unfamiliar environment with electrodes attached to them. They also asked to wake up and go back to sleep regularly, which is not representative of a normal sleep schedule. It is also made to report and recall dreams, which participants do not engage on a daily. So basically, it had low mundane realism. It is also common for participants to consume caffeine and alcohol during the day or before sleeping. So they were prevented from doing that. And they were also aware that they were being observed, so it's unclear if results would differ if the study was conducted in a natural environment for participants. So it's not exactly representative of the real world or whether it was conducted in the participant's bedroom, for example. So it did lack ecological validity. So let's talk about ethics. So confidentiality was maintained because only initials was used. The one of the person was referred to as DN, so they only use initials. There is a possibility of physical and psychological harm or discomfort. They were made to wake up multiple times from their natural course of sleep. Their sleep patterns could have been affected. Their concentration, attention, the next day could have been affected. They would feel drowsy, nauseated. They could even feel weak next day. So deception. So one of the participants was informed that he would be woken only if he was dreaming, but it was necessary to check if this information would affect participants' dream report. So they used this to as a way to check if participants would alter their dream reports by telling them, "Oh, you'd only be woken up if you're dreaming." So in a way, deception would be justified, but there was still deception. So what's the application of this study? Sleep disorders or night terrors. So interventions can target REM period to reduce dreaming because from this study it showed that majority of dreaming does happen in REM period of sleeping. Okay, so that's all for this study. And all right, so it's just another meme about dreaming. Okay, thank you for your time and hope you understood Dement and Kleitman. So I'll see you in the next video covering Schachter and Singer's two-factor theory of emotion. Thank you.